Hello, my name is Kat Swanson and I am a school social worker. I am also a graduate of the MSW program at UW, and I would like to talk to you briefly about the intervention of restorative justice and specifically talking circles and talking sticks. I am Alutiiq. I come from Alaska. My ancestors are from quyanaasinaq, which I am probably not saying that correctly because I did not grow up learning my indigenous language. It's something that I have pursued in my adult life. I was separated from my tribe at birth, and it's something that I'm very passionate about. So when I learned about the practice of restorative justice, and specifically talking circles and talking sticks, it came to my attention. Actually, it lit a fire in me because in all of the conversations I've heard and instruction I've heard about this practice, there has never been a mention of indigenous culture. And so in my mind, when we do that, particularly when we charge a lot of money to take these trainings and we don't mention the culture from which it comes from, we are participating in cultural appropriation. So I know as social workers, this is very important to us and it's important to me. So I am hoping to spread the word that we really need to mention that this practice comes from Native Americans, and probably even before Native Americans. I believe there are talking circles in some tribes in Africa, but I can only speak from my experience and what has been taught to me. And that said, I don't speak for every indigenous person. This is just my understanding, my knowing, and what has been taught to me. So without getting into the whole history of talking circles and the meaning behind the circles, what I'd really like to say and ask everyone is that if you are in a position to teach restorative justice, or if you are in a learning session, or whenever you have the opportunity and you notice that it has not been mentioned that this is an indigenous practice, I urge you to say something. Talking circles are very sacred. They are intentional. The circle is very intentional. It represents community. It represents an equalization of power. And they are used oftentimes by tribal leaders to decide very important decisions about the governance of tribes. And of course, they're also used to heal in communities, and they're also used to just air grievances or speak whatever is on the person's heart. So with that said, how a circle is conducted in traditional style is there's one person who facilitates, and they begin opening the circle with a prayer. Obviously, if we're working in schools and public institutions, we don't want to do that. So what I try to do in my circles is say hello and welcome, and I introduce myself as the facilitator and what my purpose is in the circle. And I briefly describe the talking stick. Traditionally, a talking stick would be something sacred from the tribe or from the facilitator. It is oftentimes a feather. I have my own feather that I use for my own practices outside of school. It's very sacred to me. Or sometimes there will be a traditional talking stick that's decorated with feathers, beads, animal skin, fur, that type of thing, and it's created in a very intentional way. Obviously, in schools, we don't necessarily have access to those things. So what I like to use is one of my medicine sticks, I call it. It's a piece of beechwood from Alaska, and I tell a story about it as I open, and I request that everyone who holds the talking stick does so with respect. The talking stick empowers the speaker to speak from the heart, and the stick is passed clockwise. And in the circle, only the person who's holding the talking stick speaks. Everyone listens with their full attention and their full hearts. And the circle continues around until everything is said. Now, obviously, for time's sake, if you're in a school, you may want to limit the passes to 2 to 3 passes. And hopefully limit the speakers to 2 to 3 minutes. Generally, what I like to do is we'll do an introduction round, and then I will give a prompt. Maybe it's what happened, if you're addressing a particular situation, and then everyone will go around and say what they believe happened. And then the next round will be about what is the solution. And so then we try to come to an agreement. If you cannot reach an agreement within whatever your time frame is, you can end the circle and continue the circle at another time. The other thing about the circle is that it is a container. A circle is a complete circle. It represents the life cycle. It also represents wholeness and community. And it is actually meant to be an energetic container where we leave everything in the circle. And also what's said in the circle stays in the circle. So it's meant to be confidential. Obviously, if you're a school or professional, you have certain confidentiality agreements with other staff workers, so you may want to share and process with them outside of the circle, but it's meant to be a safe environment for the people in the circle. What else do I want to say about that? I guess my big takeaway message, I'm trying not to make this very long. Jenny knows I like to talk. I guess my hope and my request is that when you do these practices in schools, and just to recap, when you are learning about these practices, if you would mention that these practices come from indigenous culture and we would like to thank them, or I as a facilitator will say, I would like to thank my indigenous ancestors for this practice. Or you could say, I would like to thank our indigenous neighbors for giving us this practice. And that should cover you in terms of cultural appropriation. Thank you, and have a good day. I wish I could say goodbye in my language, but I haven't learned that yet.